Hello, thank you for tuning in to Geoeconomic Insight. I'm Andrew Capistrano, a visiting research fellow here at the Institute of Geoeconomics, and I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Manish Sharma, another visiting research fellow here at IOG and associate professor in the economics department at Hull State University. So Manish, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So I think there's no one else I'd rather talk to when I look at the kind of big picture of India's economic relations with the major powers in the world and where we stand at this kind of interesting time. So I think after the US-Japan trade deal had been reached at the end of July, there was a lot of talk that perhaps India could reach a similar agreement, maybe with a different tariff level, but an agreement nonetheless that would essentially bring India and Japan aligned with the United States in terms of trade in a kind of like quad-ish trade arrangement. The idea being to, I guess, leverage India's ambitions to become a hub for advanced manufacturing, exports, and to kind of create some kind of investment cooperation in economic security areas like semiconductors or critical minerals. So that was the idea. But as we all know, this did not occur. Instead, India was hit with a 25% tariff. Then there was an additional 25% tariff for the importing of Russian oil. And so let's start off by saying what went wrong with the US-India relations? Perhaps give us a little background on the history and then tell us what went wrong with these trade talks.
Yeah, it's one of the big, I think, the news item that we've seen, right? Whether there's a realignment that's happening in India. And I mean, I think it's a good place to start. The history of the relationship, the bilateral relationship between India and US. And one thing, so we go back all the way to 1947, India gets independence, and one of the first thing that happens is the US is looking very proactively to engage India because there was also the Soviet, there was this competition and there was a fear that India may also go Soviet way. And so initially you find some of these big name economists that have very positive outlook about India, J.K. Galbraith being one of the earliest one. He was also an ambassador to India in 61, 63, if I'm not mistaken. And so there was an understanding of the Indians' development path, so to say. But then you find from Indian side, it was not, there was some hesitation in engaging with the US because of the colonial history. And India was trying to formulate what became non-aligned movement. It became one of the founding party to the non-aligned movement, and that became the initial starting point. And then you find within 10 years of India's independence, some other economists like Milton Friedman, they were criticizing the whole planning, socialist planning mechanism that India chose. So that was the initial kind of relationship that we see between the two countries. And then the second phase comes in the 70s when India had this war with Pakistan, 71 actually. And by that time, Pakistan was an allied partner of US. So during that particular event, there was an aircraft carrier that came to Bay of Bengal, American aircraft carrier, and they put their armada and their submarines in the middle. And that was the time when India actually tilted towards Soviet, because they realized this was probably the most pragmatic way. We can't remain non-aligned. So that was the second phase. And the third was the 91, when we see the whole unipolarity that we see emerging. And along with that, India also embarked on the economic liberalization from 91. And that's when you see at the kind of within a decade, Clinton administration comes and there were some kind of, little steps towards realignment, so to say, or some kind of a reset. So that is in nutshell. And from there on, we've seen 2.5 decades of successive bipartisan friendship that kind of, there was never an alliance, but there was a partnership, quite strong partnership that was built. in terms of manufacturing, in terms of defense cooperation and Quad that you mentioned. So all of that has happened. And in last 6 months, a lot of that has been unraveling. So you rightly mentioned, and we actually see a lot of that. So the big question is where India is going in this backdrop. One of the things that I notice is India is not really going away. India is biding its time. There is a strategic silence that you would say from the foreign policy perspectives. The 50% tariff is, if you look at the overall GDP, it's going to have a meaningful impact in some parts which are essentially labor intensive. So it will be politically difficult, economically difficult. But if you look at the overall GDP, it's very minor. It's the impact on GDP growth rate would be anywhere, my calculation is 0.2% to 0.4%, depending on what kind of carve-outs, what kind of exemptions are put forward. Yeah.
So in the talks, I think that one of the big sticking points, I want to get back to the non-alignment in a second, but in the trade talks, it seemed like one of the big sticking points here was that Trump was pushing India to accept a 20% baseline tariff, which would be 5% more than, say, Japan, the EU, South Korea got, and about the same as some of the ASEAN nations, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines got. So that was one part of it, because I understand that India's main competitor in manufacturing and exports at the same segment would be the ASEAN countries, especially Vietnam.
Right. Yeah.
And the second one was that it seemed that Trump was demanding market access in some politically sensitive areas for India. So although there may have been benefits of reaching this deal in terms of for the segments that export to the United States, for India's own internal domestic economy and for the political sectors that those sectors of the economy have influence with, it was perhaps maybe seen as a bridge too far.
Right. So that's the agricultural, pharma, dairy. Some of these sectors are considered to be very important, politically speaking. Dairy especially, I think, I hear it repeatedly, the dairy lobby in India has put their foot down, and that made it very hard for any kind of negotiation. But having said that, the Indian side, what I've heard, there has been a lot of flexibility. So 25% reciprocal tariff was a contention because India wanted to be competitive. So ASEAN countries, typically they've got 20% or 19 to 20%. That's the typical. And India was aiming for 15%. That's the official position. But I think there is some flexibility in that because Indian export, even despite the fact US being the largest export market for Indian merchandise, but the size of, as I said earlier, size of merchandise export to the GDP is really relatively smaller. And there are carve-out, there are exemptions in place, like electronics, for instance. Apple has got that exemption. So a large part of, I think one of the most sensitive part of India's Make in India plan is so far intact. But we don't know how long that will continue. And right now, the agriculture, I think even on American side, the understanding is agriculture is a no-go area for India. And there could be some product-specific exemptions that are in place. And India is unwilling to reduce tariffs to zero. That was not on the table to begin with. So that also was irking the negotiator on the US side. And you can actually argue, I think Trump rightly argues that India had historically high tariff rates. If you look at the average tariffs, it's somewhere around 17%, the applied tariffs for imports. And in agricultural, it's about 40% roughly. So it's fairly high. But Indian dilemma, or I think it's really hard for, because a lot of the agricultural sector employs a large part of the working age population in India, and they live it's subsistence level farming. So government protection is vital. Even if it's not politically, even if it was not a politically sensitive issue, the government will have to think it's a rational sort of choice, policy choice for the government. So that is not on the card. So a lot of people are saying with the in last couple of weeks, the U.S. Has been demanding a lot of things, but there seems to be some softening of pressure.
Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing.
No, that's what I'm hearing too.
Yeah.
So, of course, understanding the, I guess, domestic political constraints from the agricultural sector, perhaps you could, because you mentioned it a second ago, perhaps you could just briefly outline what is the Make in India, what is this strategy, and how does that fit into India's ambitions to move away, perhaps, from over-reliance on the agricultural sector and to move into more manufacturing and export?
Right. So, India has been trying to sort of take a leaf from the Chinese experiment where the manufacturing, and India has that domestic market. So it makes perfect sense for that policy to be adopted. But India has been struggling with that policy. It has what is called production-linked incentive. If you produce things, you get subsidies, you get tax benefits, and a number of other things. You get line of credit and also access to domestic market. So if we look at the outcome of this policy being in place for 7-8 years, we do see it has not really gone as the policymakers would have liked. The one big success was Apple's investment. And I think in recent years, there is in semiconductor space, you have a lot of activities that are happening, especially for packaging and testing. And there is one fab that should start operating in producing in about a year and a half time. So there is a lot of positive sort of impetus that you'll see in manufacturing, but it has not really worked as they would have liked. So the idea that a lot of these agrarian people who are in the agricultural sector, they'll move to the manufacturing jobs, that has really not played out as the policymakers would have liked. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I guess that presents, I guess, a challenge. And if the U.S. market can't offer as much as the agricultural sector can, then in reality, when it comes to time to pick and choose, they'll pick with the agricultural sector and the voters that those sectors are aligned with.
Right. So politically, it's extremely difficult for anyone. And there is a political opposition that is vehement, that's talking about it. So if if there is an image that the government is bowing to the US pressure, that would be politically suicidal. That's for sure.
Okay, that's a great point. Okay, so India, of course, doesn't want to make it look like it's bowing to U.S. pressure. Now, from the U.S. perspective, however, it would seem that in the aftermath of the failure of the U.S. and India to reach this agreement, that India began to tilt more towards the BRICS and SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, bloc, which is interpreted in the United States as like an anti-American bloc. So going back to this idea of India's strategic autonomy and how it fits in with economic policy and trade relations, we have to note that 25% of these tariffs are the so-called reciprocal tariffs. 25% is for importing Russian energy. And after the talks broke down, I want to read you this quote that shows that perhaps Trump is a little less attuned to the idea of strategic non-alignment and sees anything moving away from the United States as inherently moving towards BRICS and SCO. So let me just read you this quote. So on July 31st, Trump said, "BRICS is basically a group of countries that are against the United States, and India is in it, if you can believe that. BRICS is an attack on the dollar. We will not allow anyone to attack the dollar." So this is probably part of the pressure campaign to get Modi to come back to the table, but it also shows that this is not necessarily just about trade, that there's a kind of geopolitical and geoeconomic dimension to this trade spat. So when Modi then travels to SCO and is received warmly by Xi Jinping, the, I guess, optics was that India is tilting towards the SCO. So how do you see it? Is India tilting towards SCO, or is it remaining the traditional non-aligned stance?
Yeah, right. It would be hard to imagine that India going in SCO or becoming part of it. The plans that they have or the policies, the defense cooperation. India has not really participated in most of it. And if you notice, the right next day there was this parade, the massive in Beijing, and India did not participate in that. So I think it was for the show. It was the optics for towards US. A lot of people do see that, and it was not a break from whatever India has done recently. That also you can confirm that there has been criticism of US policies coming from China, from a lot of SCO member countries, but India has remained consistently silent. So there is no criticism or no comment, even I would say, to the US demands or US expectations from India. A lot of that has been happening behind the scene. So I personally don't really see any break, and it would be quite impossible for India to form a trust-based relationship with China, if you look back the history of the two countries. So there is a lot of sensitive topics that have not been resolved, the border being one, but there are other things. There is something called string of pearl, where all the neighboring countries and the ports, they are controlled by China, and now we've got a new problem with Nepal. Somebody's calling it fire of a string of fires. So Bangladesh, first it was Sri Lanka, then Bangladesh, and now Nepal. The government has regime change, and that leaves India with very little options. So China is a long-term management issue. And that's what Indians are trying to do. They are trying to manage that relationship because it's a reality. It's a next door reality, as I like to call it. And there is no easy path to friendship. I don't see friendship happening. There has to be a significant give-in from the Chinese side if they are willing to give up a lot of the hardened position that they have had. Then there is a possibility of maybe a rapprochement, if you will say. Yeah.
So during SCO, Trump put out a post with a picture of Modi, Putin, and Xi, and said, "Looks like we've lost Russia and India to deepest, darkest China. I hope that they have a prosperous future together." So you think that? I think that again was part of the pressure campaign. But so you think that that's wrong. So what does Trump get wrong about India? What does he not understand about this strategic non-alignment that is, I guess, part of the Indian historical tradition going back to independence?
Right. So the sensitivities that I talked about, right? If you've been under colonial rule for 250 years, 200 depends how you, because initially it was a company and then it became the. I think that has created, there is this inbuilt proclivity against aligning with great power. That's how India started. And I think, Trump probably, the history is not his strongest suit. That's one thing you would see. And also the relationship between Russia and India, it goes back a long time. And Russia has stood with India through all kinds of events. So Russia is extremely important. And I think we've had one of the presentations where it talks about how Russia will continue to play a role in the energy market. It's going nowhere. In order to reach whatever the goals we have of the sustainable future, Russia is part of that. So Indians do realize that it's pragmatic, but also based on history and trust. And I think, Trump has not really understood that dynamic. Also the agricultural sector, the importance of it for Indian economy, and the whole idea that India has actually taken benefit of America, that has not essentially been, that's not the truth. So people know that, a lot of that. And I think the best way, and that's what the Indian government has tried to do, best way would be to engage at the top leadership level and explaining these things. But what didn't really help was the difference of opinion about the Indo-Pak conflict. And Trump had different ideas about it, but Indians very vehemently. There was a phone call between Modi and the last one, which was apparently very acrimonious. And that has led to, right after that, you find the American position hardening. So that's one of the red lines for India. India does not accept as a foreign policy any kind of mediation in its relations with other countries. And so that's a red line that Indians cannot, even if it's economically problematic. And India has gone through a lot of problems, like nuclear tests that they've done in 98, 71 first, and then 98. There were a number of sanctions. Almost everyone came together, but it took a while for India to come out of it. So that's where Indian position that Trump is kind of struggles to understand.
Yes, and he tried to say that he brought the peace between India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
That didn't really fly over so well.
Yeah.
But so how about the position of India in terms of demand for Russian energy? Is it even realistic for India to cut it off, even with extra 25% tariff, or is the benefit of having this cheap energy supply overwhelm the kind of the negative point from the tariff?
Not really. So when you look at the price cap that was set by G7, then it was extremely beneficial for Indians because the margin was really high. But if you look at the market price, because it's come down so dramatically, the Indians are getting maybe $1 or $2 a barrel. So it's actually very easy for India to switch. But what India is trying to explain is, because India is such a huge importer, such a demand player in the market, if that demand goes to Middle East, you will see a massive jump spike in the oil prices, energy prices. And that was the reason why India was asked especially by the US administration, the previous administration, that you should engage with Russia and you should buy. So globally, and India is also one of the biggest refiner of oil that goes to Europe, that goes to a lot of other countries. So taking that capacity, if there is this 50% tariff, it's not tenable actually in the long term, because the energy price would, right now, the big shock in the energy market, we don't really see that, but that could be a big shock. So that's what Indian position, they're trying to explain that it's fine, India can easily move. It's not a profitable proposition at the moment, but the issue is what happens to the global. So Indians are already cutting their, the Russian crude import it's been going down. And also because there is a cyclicality. So it should be easily doable. And that's why I don't see the 25% additional punitive tariff. It won't be there for long. Yeah. I think it has a short shelf life.
So, I mean, I suppose that it could be part of India's bargaining position. But I've noticed that we've seen a sort of softening of the tone recently, as of late, the last 2 weeks. We saw Trump essentially saying that, well, we're going to get the trade talks back on. Then Modi replying that, yes, that we are looking forward to working towards a trade agreement with the United States. So we see a bit of a softening of the tone. I wonder how sustainable that is. But getting back to this idea of India, I think kind of balancing between the sort of economic, the recasting of the international trading system that Trump wants to create versus the economic system that China wants to create. I just wanted to ask your opinion on a couple of points. Okay, so India has a consumption-driven economy, right? Yeah. And like the U.S. So without the U.S. market for its exports, will India face some kind of issues when it comes to propping up the rupee, stabilizing its current account, maintaining domestic demand? Are we going to see, if these tariffs stay on, is India going to suffer? So that's the first thing. And secondly is what exactly does the BRICS or SCO order have to offer? Because India has a kind of unique position in BRICS, meaning that it has, it has a trade surplus with the United States. It has a trade deficit with its BRICS partners, and it essentially functions as like an absorber of demand. If India has a $45 billion trade surplus with the US, about 1% of GDP, and a trade deficit with China and Russia of $150 billion, or nearly 4% of GDP, what does India see as its position in each of these two kind of emerging trading systems, a bifurcating of the global order. Because you could see on one hand, India might want to move to the United States for the export-driven growth that we discussed earlier. But on the other hand, what exactly does it have to gain from remaining in the BRICS or this SCO dominated world if isolated from the US as a result?
Right. One of the Indian position about BRICS, and that's where, again, there is I think, misunderstanding about India's intention, why it is in the BRICS. So BRICS is essentially, it is, for the moment, it's not really, it's just a talking shop, right? People meet and there is not much policy driven, there is no coordination, nothing of that sort is happening. So giving it a lot of importance is probably one of the, from the Indian perspective, is a bit of a mistake because it can take its own sort of shape by pushing it. So that's one of the concern. In India and South Africa were, and Brazil as well, they were the ones that were against what China and Russia wants to do with BRICS. So these were the bulwark against, for instance, de-dollarization. India is was against that idea. But now you see, because of this all pressure, there is this conversation. If you look at BRICS, the size of that economy, it's roughly the half GDP of the world, right? In terms of, so it is a behemoth in itself. The only issue is the coordination. There is not much coordination. There is not much policy discussion that's happening. It's just people meet and they have these photo ops. That's been the case so far. So if we don't go into the symbolic sort of coming together, and I think there is a realization with G20 and being other place. So it is not trying to become a G7 so far. There is a possibility that it will go in that direction. So that's one thing I would say Americans would have to reconsider. Having an India there is a better thing because it stops from it becoming anti-American, the way Trump puts it. But if India leaves it, that actually creates all the like-minded countries, and there is more likelihood of long-term repercussions of that. India is unwilling. I don't really see India is going to leave BRICS or any of these multilateral. In case of SCO, it's different. SCO is, India was brought on to SCO by Russia because Russia felt it was mainly China-centric. It was becoming China-centric. And because there are a lot of these Central Asian countries, and Russia didn't want too much of Chinese influence on that. So they brought in India. And so India is playing against the same balancing act in these. By having India there, it's actually an insurance that these organizations don't turn against West, is what my,
You see, that's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. And I definitely think that a Trump administration is not really aware of that dynamic there. So the question becomes then, if Trump and to a lesser extent the US sees India less as like a trading partner and sees the relationship more as like a strategic partner in kind of balancing against China, one might even say containing China, then what is the utility, I suppose, of using these trade levers in this way? And if India is indeed, trying to maintain a sort of strategic non-alignment by balancing relations with the United States, with its relations with BRICS, I wonder if the world continues to bifurcate along these kind of geoeconomic lines, is there going to be a cost to pay for India of this non-alignment? Or, is Trump going to continually, does he want India to pick sides and stop hedging? Or, and if India doesn't pick one or the other, is there going to be a cost to pay by picking neither?
Right. So I forgot to mention. So we started the non-alignment. I mean, that was the original idea. But now what Indian foreign policy experts talk about, they talk about multi-alignment, which means we want to be friend with everyone.
Multi-alignment.
Multi-alignment. That's the main foreign policy, basically, fulcrum around which most of the decisions. So if you look from that perspective, and China is a reality, as I said earlier, it's a next door neighbor. You can't have animosity forever. So India would have to have some kind of workable relations, maybe. US is much more aligned, I think, from Indian perspective. And India was also part of this balancing China thing. They don't want to go into the sort of armed grouping or some kind of a military alliance. Right. That's out of question for India. But I think it's very hard to see. So 80 years or so of India's independence, and you find India has been sticking to this. There's a bipartisan or multi-party consensus on that India doesn't want to take side. So that is it's an unlikely scenario. Even Japan knows it very clear. We are here. Japanese know it very clearly that India is not going to be part of any strategic. If there is any strategic event, India is not going to come and become part of it. So Quad being there, India has never really signed up to the military side of it, military cooperation. Having said that, India does have military-to-military engagement with US, for instance. They've just had joint exercise. And India engages with a lot of other countries. That is, to me, looking at the history of India, like China, India has the proclivity for pain. They can take a lot more pain than other countries. So even though it's going to be politically costly, but I think no leader would come out and remain in the power, taking sides. So in the domestic politics and the domestic policy history sort of informs us that the taking side is unlikely for India. That would be untenable. Yeah.
So, and I have to say, I defer to your opinion, but I tend to agree with that sentiment. But so before we move on from this discussion of US and China, so I would like to just pick your brain here. And what do you think about two scenarios? And just give me your reaction. So in scenario A, India makes let's say in a month, India makes an agreement with Trump and it's 20% tariffs with some market access tied into it, maybe some strategic investment. Okay, so that's scenario A. Scenario B is India decides to integrate more deeply with Russia and China and create a kind of, I guess you could say, like a BRICS system where India is has a lot of low-cost production, consumer demand. Russia brings energy, critical materials, and China brings advanced technology and manufacturing. And so, in each of these let's say alternative worlds, how do you see India faring in terms of its overall economy? Its I guess you could say its external imbalances, but also the internal imbalances within the Indian economic model.
So one thing I've noticed, especially talking with the policymakers in India, is there is this disquiet about reaching a trade deal with America, because they've seen what happened with other trade. Nothing is written; it's in the water, basically. So even if you have a deal tomorrow, so one of the sticking point for India was if we sign up on something, then we don't want any additional tariffs to come, and Americans were unwilling to. So that's one thing. Just to. India is already trying to reach out to China, and there is this understanding at the ministerial level about India. There is a complementarity among the two economies. So in China is becoming more expensive, the wages have gone up. So a lot of that manufacturing may shift to India. What they've done with Vietnam, for instance, right? A lot of that can happen, but that brings a lot of risk. From the West. So India is not willing to totally sign up. China has actually offered that we can invest if we sign up on other things. And China is also willing to give more market access. So that's one thing Indians are working at the moment because there is no clarity about the US trade deal. So they're working with EU, as you mentioned, and they're working with China also. But it's in very preliminary stage, the discussion, because India runs a huge deficit with China. And so imagine the export to China from India are about $20 billion, but the import are $130 billion. So it's a massively unbalanced relationship. And India can't do much about it because there are the inputs, there are the sort of kits that are put together, assembled for the electronics. So that's I do see India is trying to do both. It's not an alternate thing. India is trying to get the Chinese economic trade relation with China to be more balanced. That's an attempt. But America remains the focus. So there is no going away. No one talks about a break with the American sort of trade, even if there are alternative markets are found about, especially the sectors which are under tariff. So government, for instance, India is trying very aggressively to find alternate markets for that, but it's obviously it takes a while. And in the meantime, there is this disruption. All those shops are closing and factories are closing. So there's a massive dislocation that's happening. And
so that makes sense. Yeah. So and I think that's perhaps some of the reason why despite the hit that U.S.-India relations took over the past month, I mean you do see a bit of a softening of the tone.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you do see China about a month ago, after the kind of Trump started getting angry about the Russian energy imports, China removed its export restrictions on critical minerals and other items that had been under export control to India. And then you see at the SCO, Xi talking about let's integrate our economies and build a more orderly, multipolar world. But in your view, you don't really see India, I guess, as fitting into that mode. Perhaps maybe they see this as an opportunity to repair relations with China, but not necessarily drift deeper into China's orbit.
That's never going to happen. But there are practical benefits of coming together, economic, and that's coming. That's championed by the leadership, business leaders in India and China both. So that is much more likely, and we will see a lot more integration between the two countries in the coming years. And Chinese have realized after this skirmish at the border and having these eyeball-to-eyeball militaries for 3 years, the Himalayan heights, extremely expensive and extremely problematic, like for the armies to remain at that high altitude. So China has realized that India is not going to be easily, it's not a pushover. So that's where you, probably there is a change of heart, you would say. But Trump is also causing that because China is looking quite extensively to build alliances. I think probably Philippines is the only country where they're unwilling to buzz, but with Vietnam, you see there is coming together, closer cooperation. So India is looking at that for sure. Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. Just in the last couple of days, you see Trump's latest social media barrage about the Russian energy, and he specifically is asking European nations to tariff China 50 to 100%. But what I found most interesting was not that. It was the absence of India in this social media attack.
Right.
So do you think these are signals that perhaps behind the scenes there's a kind of rapprochement occurring with trade talks reopening?
Yeah. So that conversation was going on, actually. That was ongoing, and Indian side was miffed at, especially from some of the administration officials calling out India and Modi even. So there was some sensitivity to that, but there has been conversation. And I think today the trade negotiator from US is going to be in New Delhi. Though there is a lot of hope on both sides, and I think they don't want to really torpedo. So there is that sensitivity. But have you seen the new act in the US Congress, the FIRE Act? Is it FIRE or is it?
I think so, yes.
Right, which is about the taxing the services. 25% taxes. And that has become much more a problem for India because that's coming from Congress, and which will be, there not much you can do once that's, becomes an act. So that could put India in a lot more stress than the merchandise trades. That's not the big issue because India is right now, when we talk about the exports, the service exports form bulk of India's export. So things like GCC, Global Capability Centers. So most of the S&P 500 companies, I would say 50% to 60%, they have their GCC in India. And it's not just like some superficial work, but really the main work, the behind the scene work that's done in India. And if that gets taxed by 25%, then that puts Indian growth story in a much more strain than the current. I think I'm not really so much worried about the tariffs, but the tax that is proposed, that would have substantial material impact on Indian economy.
So it's more about the services than the goods.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about, the U.S. and China, and India's place between it. But these are not the only players in the world. So
that's true.
Before, the last thing I would like to talk about is perhaps India's other options outside of this kind of BRICS, SCO, or U.S.-led, new recasted trading system. So on July 24th, we had the long-awaited UK-India deal. So this slashed tariffs on a lot of Indian goods to Britain. I think it was like over 90%.
That's right.
And then also opened up some market access for British whiskey, cars, these kinds of things. So first, I'd like to ask you your thoughts on this. But then more important, really, is this idea that there could be a EU India FTA with talks that are going to be starting from October 6th. And so what is your thoughts on this kind of UK-India deal? What implications does it have for a potential EU-India deal? And what are the other options for India outside of this kind of bifurcating system? Could it play a greater role in maybe forming a third economic bloc?
Thank you. That's a very important question. So what India has done with UK, it has that signaling effect. If you look at the material benefit to Indian economy, it's rather limited, but it does set a sort of a blueprint for a lot of these trade talks and trade deals. Now, EU and India trade deal is a real thing because it's been going on for years, and they have already, it's been going very methodically, so they have covered like 26 chapters total in that trade deal, and they've covered 18 to 19 of that. So it's pretty much at the end, and there is a sense of urgency from both sides. Ursula von der Leyen, she came, I think, to India along with all the commissioners. First time she has gone anywhere, to New Delhi. And there was this push to have this deal speeded up. So if we look purely from the size, market access and the size, EU is the only economy that is comparable to US. Pretty much similar size, market size. So Indians are actually extremely focused. Indian government is extremely focused on getting that deal, as you rightly pointed out. Probably October is the target, but it may, there are still sticking points. But the good thing in case of EU and India is the agriculture is not really much of a interest from both sides, because Europe is also not very interested in opening its agricultural sector. So there is a lot more understanding. So I think if there has been some leaks from the discussion, but I would say the sticking point is, for instance, is about some of the generic agricultural produce, for instance, basmati rice, which is the long grain Indian rice or Pakistani rice. So both India and Pakistan, they produce that. And India is asking for exclusive branding rights in European Union, and European Union it's going to be untenable, for instance. So that seems to be one issue, because, and why we know it, because Pakistan has lodged protest. They have also said that this would not be accepted. So there is a geopolitical sort of angle to the EU-India trade talks, but we don't have much clarity about the substance that's been discussed, apart from agriculture is not the focus.
I think that's a very interesting distinction there. I mean, I do think that if India and EU were to actually finish up this trade agreement, and I wasn't aware that it was so far along, so that's actually quite a promising sign, and then also create some kind of trade agreement with the United States, I suppose in the short term that would be perhaps the best case scenario for Indian trade.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what Indians are hoping for. And also, what this has done, I think in 6 months, it has a lot of benefits to India. When they may not seem long-term benefits. One of the benefits is India was the one that was dithering about these trade deals with Europe was complaining. Europe wanted that deal a long time ago. UK wanted that, but India was not really very keen. But because of what Trump has done, India has a lot more of these conversation or talks, preliminary stage. So there are almost 40 FTA-related discussion, not totally free trade, but some kind of trade-related discussion that India is engaged right now. The second benefit, if I may spell out, is there is very serious push for economic reform. There was inertia so India did their first reform, the massive reform in 1991, and from then there were piecemeal sort of changes that were made. So one of the things that happened last month was the tax. India has changed the tax code, reduced the consumption tax, and that's cosmetic. It will have temporary impact on the pressure that the consumption is feeling. But India is also considering some of the reforms to the land and creating a mechanism for the export industries, also cutting that red tape. So India, the biggest issue right now is if you want to start a company, it takes forever because you need so many different licenses. And India is trying to streamline. There is this working group that is set at the top in the Prime Minister's office that's working on those reforms. So, which would not have happened. There was no need for that because everyone was happy with the status quo. So I think the Trump tariff have brought that push, which could be a positive.
The Trump effect.
The Trump effect. Yeah, absolutely.
So last question. Yeah. Okay, so before Modi went to the SCO meeting, he stopped over here in Tokyo.
That's right.
In Japan. So where does Japan fit in to India's, I guess you could just say, larger economic agenda, where it sees itself going in the next 5-10 years in terms of advanced, more manufacturing? There's a lot of talk about semiconductors, economic security. Where does Japan fit in to India's economic ambitions?
Yeah, right. So I think a lot of people don't talk about the Japan trip of Modi, but that is probably the most important foreign policy sort of engagement that India has had in, I would say, in 6-7 months, I would say. Because the substance of that, the things that were signed, they are historic. Now, India and Japan have been coming closer for a while now. I think Prime Minister Abe was the one who put his political capital in ensuring that India becomes more engaged, and Indian government also reciprocated. So when you look at the ODA, for instance, India was one of the biggest recipient of ODA. So a lot of projects, infrastructure projects, like there's a Shinkansen bullet train that should start operating next year. I think that's the plan. That's the Japanese help and also financing. In this particular trip, if we were to sort of dissect one key element, which I'm not sure how practical it's going to be, and is the people-to-people interaction, and especially migration, immigration of Indians. 500,000, that's the number, and that's pretty sizable, right? And 10% of that would be the highly skilled. I'm fine with the high skilled part, but I'm not really sure how that would play out, because that leads to that requires a lot of other things, how prepared they are for Japanese society's language. And so in India, you do see increase in schools that are teaching now Japanese. So there is that trend, which you might have seen in Vietnam, for instance. Vietnam has embraced Japan in last 17, 18 years. And India is kind of moving in that direction. So among the Asian partnerships, India does see Japan is probably the most special relationship that India has currently. And it is across the board. It's in economics for sure. There's technology, cooperation. There is a lot of co-development platforms, defense-related industry. There is collaboration that's happening. Semiconductor, you rightly mentioned. And also there is collaboration on the military front. There is interoperability. So there are a lot of joint exercises. In some, I would say Japan is probably the most consequential partner for India right now in Asia.
Fascinating.
By far,
Japan-India relations offers many new opportunities. India-Europe, it's not just about the United States and China, but India, I think this goes back to the kind of general theme of this, is India is not necessarily not aligned, but multi-aligned.
That's right, yeah.
Well, great. I really appreciate this discussion with you, and thank you so much for talking about India's place in the world right now. It's a very important topic, and I hope that all of you learned as much as I did. And thanks again to Professor Sharma, and for you for turning into IOG Insight.
トランプ大統領のスタンスを飲まざるを得ないっていう状況がまだ続いてるんじゃないかなっていうのは、第一次トランプ政権の時の外交政策をめぐるその政権内のあれこれからのレッスンとしてはありそうですけども。